Hi everyone and welcome. Today's session is all about an introduction to teaching computing, and it's looking at a bit of Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, I should say, sorry. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rachel Crudup. I'm part of the central team at Leo Academy Trust. So coding and computing all fall into that sort of one big area. And I always like to go in with the fact that initially I was a classroom teacher before I moved to the UK, and I was sort of thrown in the deep end to teach computing, which was something that I had no background in at all. I had been using technology in the classroom heavily with my learners, but I'd never done any coding. And it was one of those areas that I said, no, it's not going to happen. We aren't going to be teaching coding as part of the curriculum. And suddenly I was doing just that. And I really like this quote from Steve Jobs that says, everybody in this country should learn to program a computer because it teaches you how to think. And this was something that I didn't realize, just how much coding allows you to think and be creative. I thought it was just about sitting there and learning how to create a program. So I'd like you to think about what words come to mind when you think of coding. And I wonder if any of these match up with your thoughts. So we often think about coding being about that sort of practical code that's used to create a program. But some of the things that we don't think about are the critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, communication, the persistence. Oh my goodness, the persistence that children learn from coding is such a strong area. The courage to try new things. It also removes that fear of failure. Children aren't able to break it. It might not work the way that they want their program to, but there's no sort of limiting factor when they code. They can also develop their math skills, meaning it's done in a meaningful context. I think that's one of the things that's really important. Processing skills and being able to follow things in a sequential manner. And also just it empowers children to see those skills that they can use and really adapt their creativity to share their learning in new ways, that they don't just have to create a presentation or a poster, that actually they can still show their understanding and their learning, even just through coding a game that others can play. So what is computer science? Computer science is one way to define the process of creating programs and solving problems used by a computer. So I thought what would be nice is to jump in to a sort of programming time activity. And this one is just to sort of bring it back a step, because often what happens is with coding is that we think, okay, we need to get the children on straight away to being able to code a game or to copy some code to program something. But often we don't think about what are the actual skills that our children are learning by doing this. So in this one, it's very much an unplugged activity, and we talk about that quite a lot, and the importance of unplugged computing as well as that physical or actual computing. So for this one, this task is a programming task, and it's very similar to Simon Says. So for example, you would go and say, programmer says, clap once. Programmer says, clap twice. Programmer says, look up. Now look down. And then when you do this with your children, obviously at those moments where you don't say programmer, they would look and be out essentially. And I think what's nice is getting them used to that fact that programming is all about giving those sequential instructions, and also that actually some computing is done unplugged. It's about thinking about that process that happens and takes place as well. So in terms of that coding terminology, what is it that we need to be thinking about? So this is taken from Barefoot Computing, and bear in mind that if you are coming back, we are having another session from Barefoot Computing, which will be a hands-on session looking at all of the unplugged side of computing, which is very much tailored especially to Key Stage 1, but it's also to say that there is a lot more sort of hands-on engagement, which really breaks down those coding aspects. And computational thinking is really thinking about how we solve problems effectively with or without a computer. And actually, we do a lot of this every day. We think about the concepts, so logic, evaluation, algorithms, patterns, decomposition, and abstraction. And then we think about the approaches, so how are we actually going to solve those? Tinkering, so having a go, just trying, clicking, seeing what happens. Our pupils love doing that. Creating, so designing, making, being creative in the way that we show that. Debugging, so finding and fixing those errors. Collaborating, where we work together. And then persevering, so being able to keep going during those challenges. And then we look at the programming side. So algorithms are expressed as code, which then in turn creates that program. And programming is designing and writing those instructions for a computer in a language that it understands, commonly known as code. So there's the inputs, which is that information that goes into a computer. So usually when we are typing, then we have things like our outputs. So that screen, what we actually see coming out. Also things like the sound that we hear when we are talking and maybe hearing our voice back. And then we have those sort of in-between areas. And that's looking at things like selection, sequence, variables, programming, most commonly, and repetition as well. And all of those key concepts in the center here are actually what make up our programming. And it's worth saying that all of these resources can be found on the Barefoot Computing site. And I'd highly recommend going and checking out these resources. You'll see here that there's lots of information, there's lots of lessons and guides that you can access. So in the resources section, you can see lessons. And again, these lessons are broken down. It's worth noting that the age ranges are very much a guide, and some of these can be obviously used with other children as well. So there's lots of different computational thinking tasks, posters, all of those kinds of things you might like to display, code cracking tasks, Lego building. Again, even those send tasks I've used in Key Stage 1 because it's just fantastic because it really gets them thinking and creating as well. And then in the curriculum section, again, you can filter these resources. So you have your English curriculum based on the national curriculum areas. And all you need to do is just make sure you log in or register so that you can access these resources. So if you already have an account, then you can just simply go and log in. If not, you can just register. And I highly recommend logging in because you'll be able to see that there are lots of different content videos that you can access as you go in. So you can see here, you can go into the resources section or that lessons bit that I mentioned before, and you can go through and find the specific lesson that you're looking for as you go through. And then it's worth saying that all of these resources and activities that are available in here can simply be opened, and then there's the objectives, and there's also sort of the timings. And when you download the resource, it's then broken down into those key concept areas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump back to our presentation and just go through some more. So that's obviously that unplugged side. We're now just going to talk a little bit more about computer science. because computer science and computing is very much about that design and creation of computer programs, and it's done by those logical instructions. And I really like this idea about the computer science is about creating. It's not just about consuming. Yes, when we think about those that code, they are very much just sitting there and typing away and coding those lines of code. But we don't think about those opportunities where we get our pupils to actually think about, okay, how can I create? How can I tell that story in another way? So computer science is a tool that can help our learners make a story or create something that moves or that happens. And it is a skill that teaches our students to use computers to create and not just have to consume it, not just consuming information or simply typing up information. It's important to remember as well that computer science isn't just about learning how to type. That's where our digital skills come into play. And it's not just about playing video games either. It is very much actually going back to a blank canvas and starting to think about what happens when I make this character move? What happens when I get this character to say something? A lot of our children love playing games, so they do this on a regular basis. But actually, what they don't understand is how those games are created. And computing allows that to happen. So what we're going to focus on today is learning about CS first. And this is very much tailored around Key Stage 2, but it's worth saying that Scratch is fantastic in Key Stage 1. The one thing I'd recommend is if you are using Scratch, is to use Scratch Junior. And this is an app that can be downloaded both on iPads and onto Chromebooks. And what it allows you to do is really create interactive stories by putting together puzzle pieces that snap together in a similar way that Scratch does. It's just a much easier interface to work with. Again, this side of Key Stage 1, I will focus a little bit more on later on in the term as we do that session. So in terms of CS First, this is Google's initiative that's based around helping our pupils understand what computer science is. It's that tool that helps you tell the story. As I mentioned before, it's not just about simply trying to repair a computer or playing a video game. And then what is CS First? So CS First is created by the Code with Google program, and it's completely free for anyone to access. You don't need to have any computer science experience, which is what we often find when we see classroom teachers having to deliver the computing curriculum. And that's really hard when you don't have any background. Initially, when I first came to the UK and I was thrown in to teach computing, I was just following the plans that were there, but I actually had no idea what an algorithm was, what repetition meant, what a loop was, and I kept using that vocab, assuming that my children would just understand and know what I'm talking about. But it wasn't until I actually went through and unpacked these in a computing course that was when I then suddenly learned it. But what's nice about CS First is it has all of that vocab, it has all of those definitions there, so you don't need to do that work on your own. For teachers, it's that ability to introduce and facilitate the activities, and also then going around and actually offering that one-to-one support during the lesson. It's really important that the teacher does circulate when children do start getting into that coding process. Your role as a teacher within this is about questioning and facilitating and sharing and having those discussions, and ultimately having that big reflection on those skills that they've learned. It's really important that we're trying to develop the confidence in our learners to introduce those computer science concepts. And actually having a go at this first really makes that possible. And then for our pupils, what this does and what they do is they will log on and they will be able to follow step-by-step instructional videos that introduce the fundamental computer science concepts. They're able to build computer programs in Scratch. So if they've used Scratch before, this is just continues to enhance that learning. It's also about developing that debugging mindset. So they'll be given code and they need to work out what is wrong with it. So debug is to identify the bugs or the errors in that code. And they'll practice teamwork so they can work together on these problems and then learn from each other as they have sample and interest-based theme activities. And they can also learn independently. They're able to work at their own pace. They have those videos to go back to as and when they need to. And then the themes. So the CS First curriculum is broken down into various different themes that they can work on. What's nice about this is it gives them an opportunity to learn not only game design, which is the common aspect of computing that we teach, also art, storytelling, sport, being able to play with music and sounds, collaborate and have conversations with a friend as they create that, and then fashion as well. It's important to note that each one of these activities has over 10 hours of video content. So that's essentially 10 weeks that you can run these on. So you can pick and choose which ones work depending on your year. It could be that you give them more time to be able to work on it. You may just sort of do that sort of quick introduction, but you do have that amount of content there to go through. As I said, all of these different themes range from beginner to advanced, and for every activity within CS First as well, there's always that ability to go on to those extension tasks. So why do we use Scratch and maybe not Tinker or any of the others? So Scratch is an entire block-based programming tool. It's super easy to use and it's really ideal for children that are beginning to learn to code. What's nice about it is that it doesn't take much for them to see what happens when they code. And then why computer science? Why is computer science important? I think what's nice about computer science is that it allows children to create stories and games and share their learning in various ways. It doesn't just have to be about simply creating a game that they can play. And again, as I mentioned, one of the things that a lot of them do enjoy doing is actually being able to build their own video games. And they can build off games that are already created. And they can even have that music aspect or that dance aspect and really bring that in to allow that creativity to take place. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to jump into the CS First interface and show you how it looks. So let me jump in now. So prior to the class, I set up a Key Stage 1 and 2 computing, which will allow you to join, and you can see that class code is here. Now, I'm just simply going to copy this, and what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to log in as a pupil so that you can actually see both interfaces at the same time. So when I go on to CS First, this is the website. I'm just going to make it full screen so you can see. Your pupils will then tap on sign in, and then they need to select either I'm a student or I'm a teacher. When they tap on I'm a student, they'll be prompted to enter in that code. So I'm just going to drag this across and I'm going to paste that code in and tap on next. You'll see that it prompts and says, is this your class? And then I just simply tap on yes, join. It's going to ask me if I need a new CS First username and password. When your children go on for the first time, they will need to tap on yes. And then it's going to ask you to write this down so that you can log it in a moment. So I've just taken a photo of it so that I can access it. You could also just take a quick screenshot so that you can come back to it as well. Children need to then press that tick and then press sign in. Once they've signed in, you can see that their class is here. So at the moment, I haven't actually set up an assignment, so they won't be able to see anything there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into full screen of the teacher panel. Within the teacher panel, what you'll notice now is that when you go to the People tab, I can then see one of my children has joined, and I can also go in and pop their name in if I wanted to here. And you'll notice that it does come up with a reminder that it's only saved to this browser and computer. So if you go on and use another one, those names won't be displayed there. You can also add a co-teacher. So if you have another teacher you want to have access to view the class, they just need to have a teacher account, and then they join using this code, not the actual class code. You can also share this to Google Classroom if that's what you're using with your learners. To go back and attach an activity, I can just simply tap on the back arrow at the top here. I'm going to select that class. And all I need to do is just simply use that Add Activities option. Now, in terms of the curriculum, there are a couple of different things. So there are 1 hour specific activities. So this is around characterization, interactive presentation, narration, dialogue, and figurative language. There's also some hour of code. So if you want a quick little task to do, you can go through and find those. And then if you're looking at those more theme-based ones, the ones that I mentioned before, these are the ones that are broken down into that 8 or 12-hour content. And again, broken down into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So I'm just going to go in and simply start with a dialogue. And I can just tap on that Add to Class option. You can then see I select the class that I want to assign this to and tap Add to Class. Once that's then done, as a teacher, I can go in and view that curriculum. Once that's open and I have tapped on that dialogue option, this allows me to see the full breakdown of what is required. So it starts with a video, and then they go on to jump into Scratch, they finish with a survey, and then there's a little wrap up and share your project. At the top here, you can go in and view those examples. So you can see 4 different example tasks. And in the Materials tab, probably the most beneficial for teachers is that there is a Getting Started guide. So if you're new to using this, you can simply open that up, and also the lesson plan. And I'd highly recommend checking out these lesson plans. You'll also notice down below that there is the ability to download shout-out posters, stickers, class roster if you want to keep track of those usernames and passwords, certificates, and there's also contingency plans. Now, the contingency plans, again, is really helpful if you are sort of ever in doubt and thinking the internet's going to go out, or maybe your children won't have their devices for whatever reason. These are those sort of unplugged activities that you can do. So as I mentioned, this is the CS First how-to guide, again, which is really helpful to be able to go back to. You can see the prep that it reminds you to do first. It goes through a suggested class structure, wrap up, and then some sort of workarounds about what you can do for things like if they don't have a computer, if they don't have headphones, how they can get on. And there's also some prompts as well. So if ever you're going in and thinking, gosh, what do I say? This will actually help you through that process. In terms of the lesson plan, as I mentioned before, you can see that it's fully broken down. So I've got the overview, the activity details, and the learning objectives. And then I've also got which computer science topics are covered. So in this one, it looks at parallelism, debugging, and control structures. If I continue to scroll down, you can then also see the materials that you might need, what you'll need to set up first, and then the procedure. Again, it specifically goes through what it is that you'll need to say and what you'll need to cover in that session. There's also a full breakdown that shows you the code. This can be quite helpful if ever you're thinking, oh, what would I say in that situation? Or what is it that I need them to actually go through and share? Again, it will show all of those guides there to help you. As I mentioned as well, if ever you're thinking, oh, the internet's not working, or we're having problems, or I need something to do unplugged, there are various different activities here that you can use. Again, you can go through some different ones using different apps. And there's also unplugged activities where you're drawing a task or following those instructions, like that Program Says one that we did earlier together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the student and I'm going to show you what it looks like from the pupil's perspective. So when the pupils then go in, you will see that they have the activity here. So they can simply tap onto that activity to be able to launch it here. Again, they will see those examples. So if they want to bring those up, and again, if they want to access any of those materials, they can also go in and see those there. They simply tap on Start. Now, what you'll notice is it starts off with a video. So this video introduces what it is all about. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there are the instructions. So it says, watch the video, and then once finished, go to the next page. What's really nice about these videos is that you can download them. So for some videos, you can download them all at once. You can also turn captions on to make it more accessible. And if you want to be able to sort of have that pop out, because it's just easier for you, you can always do that as well. You've also got playback speed. So sometimes we find that videos can be quite slow or too fast. We can always go in and change that in here. And there's also a transcript. So if ever you think, oh, I want to jump to a specific part of that video, all of these parts of the dialogue are hyperlinked, which means that you can simply tap and that part of the video will then launch there. Once they've worked through that video, they can then go on to that next part. Again, you'll see that there is another video. And again, those instructions do appear at the end of the video, like so. So it'll show you, and now it's your turn. And then it'll have those instructions on the side. So it asks them to open the starter project, which is here. And then they're asked to go in and add a backdrop and sequence a conversation between two characters. So at this point, the first thing that they actually need to do is sign in. And often this is the one step that children miss. If they don't sign in, they can't actually come back and view this project. So it is really helpful to go in here and simply they use their same logon that they created at the start and tap sign in. Once they're in, you can see at the top here that they get that ability to remix. Tap on remix. What this does is it creates their own copy of this project. So if you've never used Scratch before, a couple of things to note. In the top right corner of the screen, you can see the profile. My Stuff is your folder. You can also access My Stuff just simply by tapping on that folder there. In the top left, if you needed to translate the language, you can do that there. In File, this is where you can go in and save your project, and you can also download it to your computer if need be. At the top here is where you can rename it. And then over here, this is your window where your code appears. So any sprites, commonly known as our characters, are added. And then we have our code working screen in here. We have our different blocks of code, and we have our different tabs. So we have a tab for our costumes and a sounds tab as well. There's also the ability to go down and add an extension. So if you're doing any physical computing, things like Makey Makey or Microbit, this is where you would go in and use those options there. Down in the bottom right corner here is where our backdrop is. Something that a lot of our children will get confused is the difference between the stage, selected now, and their sprite, selected now. So we can go in and you can select a backdrop in here. And you can see that there is a gallery of various backdrops there. And then I might just simply move those down so it looks like they're on the ground. I'm going to jump back to that video and just see open the starter project, add a backdrop, and sequence a conversation between two characters. Now, at this point, sometimes children might be really struggling to think about what it is that they're going to say. So they might have to think about what is it that they need to start with. So you can always prompt them to split their screen so that they can have what they need to code as an example, and then they can go through and code it here. Once they're finished, you'll notice that at the bottom that there are a range of various different add-ons. So if they want to learn how they can add music to their story, they can go through and watch that video to learn how to do that. They could also go through and learn how to change the costumes. And then once they've finished, I always encourage all of the children to go and explore the add-ons because they'll learn how to do something they haven't done before. Once they've finished that, they'll press on to the next one, which will take them through a survey. What's nice about this is it's a great way for teachers to check in and see how they found it. So I'm just going to very quickly jump through this here. And then press submit. Once that's then finished, you'll notice that it asks the children to share their project. So again, what it's going to ask them to do is to use that share button so they can simply go through and they come back to their project and they simply tap on share. Now they don't need to do anything more than that. Just simply tap that share button. Once that's then done, they can simply tap next. Now, I know that I've gone through that very, very quickly, and that's just because I don't want to obviously sit and watch all of those videos because you can go through and do that. But what I would like to just spend some time doing now, and again, I'm just going to come back to that teacher perspective. Is I'm going to go into my classes. And what you'll notice now is I can see that I do have one of my students signed in. And when I go in, I can see the activities that have been assigned to them. And I can actually see the progress that those children have made. So you can see here, you have a progress summary. And when you tap onto this, obviously when you have lots of children in your class, this will start to populate. And you have a summary or a legend down the bottom here that allows you to see what it is that it's showing you. So you can see how they went. So if you want to see where sort of their responses that they had to that survey, you can go through those there. And you can also see sort of that percentage of how much they completed during those tasks as well. So I'm just going to come back to our slides. And obviously we've gone through those steps as a pupil. And this is just to show you, I think my screen cut out and you won't have seen it. But when you go on, you simply tap sign in. They'll tap on I'm a student. And then again, if they're a new student, that's where they would enter their class code in here. If not, just here. If not, if they're returning, so it's their second or third or, fifth time, they always just use that returning student sign there. If you wanted to have a go in your own time and join that class, feel free to at any point. That class will remain open, so you can always go in and have a go at those activities. And as I mentioned, there's always that ability to reflect. So what I'd like you to do is just spend some time going through that curriculum and unpack different concepts that go through. As I mentioned, computer science and teaching that goes through and really encourages children to be courageous, to try new things, and also just to let them know that they can't break it. They're not going to break it if it doesn't work. Also having that confidence to try and just play with those buttons. We often don't give children that opportunity to just test and see what happens. And actually, they learn so much more when we give them that power to try, see what happens. I always like to start with Scratch, and you might decide to do this prior to going in to the CS First curriculum, is just to simply tap the create. Don't bother with the counts and sign-ins or anything like that. If you've never used Scratch, you can also go through a quick tutorial here that shows you how it works. But I actually like to set a timer and say, you've got 10 minutes, show me what you can do in Scratch. And often they'll ask, can I change this or can I change that? And what I always try and focus on is it's okay to go in and change your sprite or to change your background or maybe to go into your costumes and design your own. But I always want them to focus on the code because that's what I want to see. I want to see them taking a block and then pressing that green flag and seeing that nothing happens. But then continuing to maybe drag another block in and then drag another block and see what happens. And see what happens once they've dragged across a few blocks and then pressing that green flag and seeing what happens. Because that's actually when our children do learn the most. When we give them that time to test and try and then see what happens. As I mentioned, there are those wide range of themes that are available. And then this just goes through that storytelling just very quickly. So I know I went through that sort of going through as a pupil. I'm now just going to very quickly show you how you go about creating a class. So I'm going to come back to my classes now. And then just to create a class, I simply tap Create Class at the top. I give it a name. So this is going to be my new class. I can tap Create, and that is then done. Remember, if you want to add a co-teacher, you can do that in the People tab. You can also share this to Google Classroom as well. So I could just tap on that Share to Classroom. This will then launch that classroom screen. And I can then select the class that I want to push this to. So I'm just going to select my distance learning class, and then I can just make this an announcement, tap on Go. It's going to give the instructions there for them, and I can simply tap on Post. I could assign it to appear at a later time if I wanted to as well. The one benefit, even if you are using Google Classroom, the biggest benefit of using the CS First interface is actually that you are able to track their progress. You're able to see where each individual child is at, and also you can see their projects as well. So if I just simply come back and view my class before, what you'll notice is that when I go into People now, I have that link to their Scratch profile here. So I can tap onto that and I can see the projects that they've shared here. It's a really great way to check in what they're up to and what they're creating. So again, that CS First is really easy to do. Make sure you explore the curriculum and see. I always sort of go in and say that I started using CS First with my year 3s. And I definitely think you can use it with year 2. All I'd recommend is that you pick and choose which lessons really work. That dialogue one is quite an easy one to use with year 2. You might just decide to actually watch that video as a whole class and differentiate it that way. So they watch it as a whole class. If they want to watch it on their own device, they can go back and re-watch it if they forget how to do something. But actually you work as a whole class, then they go and have a try on their own device or working with a partner. And as I mentioned, there's those 3 things: having the computer, headphones are always really helpful, and obviously the internet. But if not, you've always got those unplugged activities within CS First, or you could also go back to Barefoot and use some of those activities in there as well. So I know we went through that. And then this is just to show you quickly the structure of the CS First. So it often follows that structure of a quick 5-minute introduction, 5 minutes to sort of showcase some projects, 40 minutes of work time, and then 10 minutes closing discussion. It doesn't mean that this is how you have to do it. You can vary this up and vary those times, but it is always important, based on the content and the learning, that there is that initial discussion that goes through the key concepts, and then that closing discussion where actually you get to bring it all back together. So as I mentioned, do take some time to go through the solution sheets as well that are available. So if ever you sort of get stuck and you think, oh gosh, where do I go for those answers? You've got those there as well. This just shows you that student dashboard. And as well, you do have those certificates that you can use as well. There's a quick getting started guide here that you'll be able to access so that you can go through. Again, that is just on the CS First website, but I've just linked that directly within the slides. As I mentioned, making sure that children do share those projects means that you can go into that classes page and view those projects as well. And then, as I said before, if ever you're thinking, okay, I don't really know much about code or how they could develop their project, there is those solutions pages as well. And there's also the CS First Help Centre. So if you are thinking, where do I start? That is a really helpful way to get going. I'm just going to finish with some other places that you can go to use in both Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So there is the Google Blockly Games, and this is a really helpful place to start. So it is quite dated, but what's nice about it is that if you are doing especially any introductions, it does go through those very simple snap together of those jigsaw pieces. So we've got our bee here, so we can snap that in like so. And then we need to think, so a bee's trait is honey. And then we can see, we can work out how many legs, like so. And you can go through and then you can check those answers at the top here. Another one that's worth mentioning as well is the CS Unplugged. So I mentioned at the start that there is Barefoot Unplugged Computing. There's also CS Unplugged, so Computer Science Unplugged. And this has a whole range of printables and activities that you can do as well. So you can go through these and access them. There's a whole range of different printable activities that they can work through, and a whole range of the different topics. So if you're thinking about how can I teach about algorithms, how could I look at sorting networks, all of these are available here as well. And you've also got code.org. Code.org is commonly known for the big hour of code that happens every year. But it's worth saying that within the hour of code and within the actual coding curriculum, that there are unplugged activities. So it's from early years all the way through until year 12. So it does cover lots there. There's lots of different hour of code mini sessions as well. So if ever you want a quick one, otherwise the actual catalogue of courses is also really helpful. You can see that there's a pre-reader express. So for those really little ones, it's very much that sort of jigsaw snapping together. And then there's a quick express course. Then there's also sort of more sort of focused courses that are a little bit longer to complete. So for example, course C here has those unplugged activities here and then goes into those actual tasks. So I'd always recommend starting with something like this first and then going on to do something like CS First. Having that combination is really nice. And what's really nice about is code.org is that most new topics that are taught, so sequencing, digital citizenship, binary, loops, events, all have some kind of unplugged activity. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to sort of do these in order, but most of the concepts do build on each other. So for example, you might decide to skip out, say, data or the digital citizenship, but actually what you do want to focus, or binary, but you do want to focus on those key concepts like sequencing, loops, events, and then go on to that final project. And then, as I mentioned, there is Scratch and Scratch Junior. And remember as well, so Scratch is that web-based version that you saw in CS First here. And then there's also Scratch Junior, which can be accessed on a Chromebook or on an iPad as well. And our next computing session is all about early years, and obviously a little bit of Key Stage 1 as well, because that's where I've used Scratch the most in Scratch Junior. And actually what's nice about that is it does give that ability for younger children to actually go and start to learn that coding process. And all that leaves me to say is thank you so much. If you are on Twitter, please follow me at TechMissC. And at Leo Computing. If you aren't already on Twitter, I definitely recommend. This is where I've learned so much about computing and coding and technology as well. So thank you, everyone. Bye.